Because today we're talking about social media and mental health and other related topics. And it's kind of apt. We mentioned this beforehand. We planned this before the week happened. I'm going to set that
Mm,
straight. We planned this before the week happened. We planned this on Saturday last week.
yeah. And then he went and pissed off Nick Milo.
Okay. So
Sorry.
to
I went straight
yeah.
there.
Okay, that's a bit harsh.
It is a bit harsh.
Yeah.
Well, I don't
To
know.
to set up a bit of context, because I went looking into my past tweets, I actually found it interesting that I had retweeted Nick Milo about 11 times in the last 2.5 months.
Mm.
I had retweeted Yanis, I think it's how you pronounce his name, the guy with all the images,
Yeah,
13
yeah,
times.
yeah.
13 times, so that's more than Nick. And also retweeted what's his name? Andrew Wilson from Ecological Psychology 7 times. And then a couple of other people around sort of like the 8, 9 mark, all of them being questions, very similar to the ones with Nick Milo. Um,
Yeah.
so it's not me picking on Nick, it's me. It's how I am on that platform. It's I see
Mm.
something, if I agree with it, I'll like it. If I really like it, I'll retweet it. If I have an opinion to share or a thought I want to make, then I'll quote tweet it. That's how I think conversations should be had on Twitter. If you have a question or you want to understand the meaning or understanding behind something, question it, because that's what happens in science all the time. That's literally what academic papers are. But instead of it being a however many character limit tweet, it's a whole freaking article.
Mhm.
It's like, here's 4,000 words. Well, I think you're wrong. Twitter, you don't
Yeah,
have 4,000 words to do that.
yeah. Hey, it was really interesting to watch. I was watching it happen as it was happening, and I'm
Oh,
like,
so you didn't like anything, you didn't comment, you were just I'm a sit here and be
I'm gonna
entertained.
grab a popcorn. I was just like, but that's not what, like, for me, I don't get what happened because it seemed to be a really interesting discussion and then it disintegrated like that.
Yeah.
And I'm
I
like, huh? But
what was going on in my head while the conversation was happening is I had sarcastically sent out an apology a few days beforehand. I think it was like Tuesday or Wednesday the week before, because someone had commented. So I was in, you can't see this unless you really go into all of the conversations
yeah.
that were happening, because I respond to everything. If I've liked it, I've seen it. That's how I treat Twitter. So every comment that goes into my notification feed, I either like or I respond to.
Mm.
So I responded because I prefer conversations. I responded to a couple of people and they were saying, "Oh, it looks like you're targeting Nick." And I think it's because they don't see the other tweets as much, because Nick is a bigger profile than the other people than
And the
I
people that you follow Nick rather than
exactly.
the other people that you follow.
So their focus is attuned to Nick because they're more
Mm.
sensitive to that sort of tweet, which is understandable. Everyone's going to be the same, so they notice those more. So
And then also more likely to defend Nick parasocial relationships.
potentially,
Right.
yeah, potentially, and so there was this sarcastic apology that I put out, and Nick said, very abbreviated here, "You be you, no apology necessary." Two quotes later, it kind of sort of goes into a 180, uh, and
It was really interesting. I'm just like, but yeah. So what was going on in your head during that conversation? That's what I want to know. Because I'm really intrigued. Like,
during what part of the conversation? Because I was having like 12 conversations at the same time, but
okay,
I'm not even
whatever.
exaggerating that. But like, I
Let's get the context of the 12 conversations. So there were 12 conversations.
yeah, okay. I'm not going to be able to remember all the names, obviously,
No, no, no,
because
of course. Yeah.
it's a lot of stuff. So there were three main, I guess you could say, triggers of conversation that I was following at the time. One of them was the Feynman technique with Nick, and that had
Mm.
4 or 5 different sort of threads going. Then I had one conversation which was about the book. Where's the book? I thought I had oh yeah, the cognitive psychology book.
Yeah.
Because I tweeted about something to do with the mind and the brain. Someone had said something about the mind being separate from the brain, and I wanted to query it. I think that was the extended brain retweet. I can't remember. I think it was that one. But they had tweeted a book, and I had tweeted in response, the cognitive psychology book, and we were talking backwards and forwards. That one had 2 or 3 people going again backwards and forwards with what the mind and the brain is. Extended cognition came into that conversation, and another one which was like totally left field was about content creation. And we were talking about content creation and how in video essays, it's kind of related to, what's his name? Pliny? I can't remember the channel's name. It's a video essay channel, and they're talking about beastification. And that's where that conversation was going on. So we were talking about the beastification of YouTube and how people are creating content just for the sake of creating content. And there was a recent video about creators stalking other creators just to get content. So I had one that was about a highly philosophical conversation, one that was about creating content online, and the other one, which I thought was about understanding the meaning behind the words being used. And within all of that, I'm talking to 12, I think 11 or 12 different people, because my notification feed was just like comment notifications. And I think during the day, I didn't do anything different. I just looked at my phone. If there was something, I responded to it. I put it down. And then the next time I looked at my phone, I just, okay, let's respond to those, put it down. So the first time I was in my bed. Second time, it was just before lunch and I just listened to a podcast. Then it was after lunch while I'm watching like thingy on TV. It's like in the ad break. Then I'm like on the loo. Like I'm in completely different environments, completely different contexts. I've taken a step back from the conversations. I'm not thinking about these actively during the responses. Yeah, my mind space, whatever you want to call it, was just like every other conversation. I'm going to respond with my thoughts. That's the way I saw it.
Fascinating. So zooming in onto the, I suppose, I don't even like it because it's not even the right word, but the spiciest of conversation, the one with the most friction, shall we say, which is the one with Nick Milo. What did you learn about how you were like, in terms of communicating in that way in social media? Because I've seen some stuff in the Discord. What did you take away from that? Because we could talk and just say, oh, this was this, that was that. But I'm more interested in the
learnings from it.
What did you get from this conversation? Because to me, the idea of that is horrifying. Although I was thinking the same things and had the same questions. And so that's another thing we can go on to in a minute. But like, what did you learn? What were your learnings from the conversation?
I wouldn't say there was anything new inside of the learnings from a philosophical or psychological standpoint. So
I meant social media.
Yeah. So I recognize that obviously people get emotionally attached to opinions. I recognize that. And that's not a bad thing. I'm also emotionally attached to the opinions that I hold, because we all hold assumptions. And I think this goes back quite nicely to Julia's comment inside of our conversation, where she was saying that I mentioned in ecological psychology, you have a disclaimer, this thing at the start, whereas traditional psychologists, traditional people inside of perception don't need to do that. But if they challenge the way that they think, now you're challenging assumptions that build up a lot of their worldview, which isn't a fun experience when you challenge your entire worldview. And when I'm probing with my questions, a lot of my questions go directly at the assumptions, because we're coming at problems from 2 drastically different points of view.
Yeah.
Which I'm fully aware of. Whether the other person is fully aware of that, I don't think so, because the assumptions that I'm making are so different. And because they're not well known, people can see that as, oh, you're just picking a fight for the sake of picking a fight.
Which is what was actually said.
Yeah. There's some words we use, contrarian. I don't think contrarian is a negative thing. I think it has been used as a negative word, especially on Twitter. Like, zooming out from just this conversation, on Twitter, being a contrarian is a bad thing. And I don't think it's a bad thing. Being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian is what scientists do. As a scientist, you sit on the fence and you try and find things to disprove your theory. I mean, when you look at chess, you think, okay, that's going to be my best move. And in order to make a decision as to whether it's your best move, you try and make it not work. Why is this move a bad move? What can the opponent do that would make it worse for me, hard for me? So being a contrarian, to me, is being a scientist. That's what scientists do. Where it becomes frustrating for me in conversation is when people say, oh, that's a straw man argument. And a lot of the time when I see that's a straw man argument, that's the other person not grasping all of the intricacies of the argument being made. That's my experience most of the time. And inside the Discord, other people from academia agree, because when you say that's a straw man argument, it's almost accepting that you don't have another point to make. You don't have another claim. You don't have an argument to put forwards, which is what happens on social media a lot, I feel, is because of the simplicity of the tweets, the posts that go out, the backbone arguments are quite flimsy. And when, as an academic, as a scientist, you start to challenge those assumptions, especially as an ecological or someone from the ecological approach, you challenge some of those really big assumptions like dualism. That's something that's been rooted in society since like what, the 1920s. When you challenge those assumptions, obviously there's going to be an emotional reaction. And what I guess to say it bluntly, I encourage those emotional reactions because it means it's making a dent. It's doing something. It's making that person think. And as a coach, I know that when you get someone emotionally triggered or emotionally riled up for some reason, whether that's a positive or a negative emotion, it means they're engaging in the content. It means they're engaging in the conversation. Whether they shut out afterwards, that is down to that individual's person's ability, skill, expertise in learning from experiences. So as a coach, I've exposed them to an environment that affords them to look at things from a different point of view. Whether they like that, whether they don't like that, whether they have different responses to it, that's up to them. That's up to their learning. But as a coach, I've done what a coach should do. I'm not on social media to coach. But the way that I learn, I coach myself.
Mm.
And so the way I see it as a self-learner, as a self-reflective learner, as a lifelong learner, I want to be my own coach. And to be my own coach, I need to challenge myself. And to challenge myself means behavioral integrity. I need to challenge other people so that I understand where they're coming from. I mean, even like an hour ago, I retweeted something about, I can't even remember what I retweeted about.
Talent.
Yeah, that was it. And when people say talent, it means drastically different things. So
Yes.
before I even make a comment or make an opinion or share a contrarian thought, I need to understand what that person means by talent.
Mm.
And that's not me just poking holes. That's me trying to understand where it's come from. Especially when it comes to language. Language is very complicated. Personally, when it comes to the comment about language being natural selection, that is a view of how language potentially evolved. I don't agree with it, but it's a view. Language.
Can you share a little bit more? I'm not familiar with that view. I just looked at it and went, huh? No.
It's funny. Bring a bit of context in here. My sister came in. She comes in all the time, sort of like asking questions and things. And I was looking at Nick Milo's tweet, the longer one, and she said, "Oh, what's going on Twitter?" Because she's on Twitter, but she doesn't actually like do anything on Twitter. And she read it, and she's in zoology, and she read natural selection. She said, "What's he mean by that?" I was like, well, I assume natural selection. Over time, things have been removed because it isn't like ideal for the biology of the animal, the organism, and the environment. She was like, yeah, but how does language do that? I was like, I don't know. And then she had some choice words for it because she was like, what? That's not natural selection. That's something else, because that's sociology, not biology, which natural selection is biology. So looking at words and language through natural selection was interesting to me, especially because we know when you look at the selfie, that's not natural selection to me. To me, that's the environment, i.e. the society itself, having an affordance that we don't currently have a name for. We are describing a behavior that we don't have a name for. That's not natural selection because it wasn't weaned out of other things. It was, we have this behavior that we need to describe. So we added a word to it.
Describe it as quickly as possible. So what do we all agree on? This. Okay, cool. Just accept it. Good.
Exactly. And then when you move forwards, I think the argument there is, well, now as we move forwards in time, natural selection suggests that we use this word instead of that word. Well, when you look at all of the abbreviations in terms and words that we have inside of language, just because a word has been used does not mean it's naturally selected to be used. When you look at like buff and ting and other words that like people like 15 are using, I have no idea what those words mean. Is that natural selection? No. That's socially selected through the environment that they're in. And when I look at that approach to language in general, I personally, I get emotional about it because I disagree with the way that that language has been
It
used.
feels binary. It puts a really hard binary oversimplification on the complexities of language, on the complexities of a dynamical system,
Yes.
which is, I suppose, exactly why you and I are just like, no, here's a cool thing. This is cool. I think we can cut this out if you want, but I
Yeah, you said I think.
I think someone in the work that I do mentioned that it was fun to see me in that different environment because I'm commonly stood talking with someone else. I can't remember their name. And I'm like, what? Danny? And they're like, yes. I'm like, it's starting to grow now. This is kind of cool. So there are people who are coming from like from my businessy world into this world as well, and vice versa. So I was like, I like it. I like it. I like it.
There was a comment, I don't know whether you saw it on YouTube, from a coach that I spoke to a while ago now, MMA coach,
Yeah.
and they were interested in us talking about ecological psychology and the ecological approach just in general. And I found it
Mhm.
interesting. And this is where my curiosity with social media comes. When I look at social media and when I look at all of the assumptions, because I've been Justin Sung has recently been posting more on Twitter. He hasn't responded to any of my tweets. So I don't know whether it's part of his team, whether it's him, whether it's a combination of two, or whether he just posts and leaves it. I don't know. But I've been retweeting some of his stuff because it's, again, built on a different assumption. And again, it's just as challenging as all the other information. But social media, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to be actually moving conversations forwards, because the people that tweet the things that start the conversations don't continue the conversations, or the people that comment about the things don't actually have an argument to be made, so they just leave the conversation. Yes, that's a bit of a reach. Maybe they do have an argument to be made, but they don't have the time. So why did they have, like, my question would then be, so they had the time to argue, to start the argument, but they didn't have enough time to continue the argument to actually help the person. They just wanted to leave something annoying. To me, that isn't productive in a conversation, so just don't do it. When I leave a comment, I leave a comment knowing that I'm going to respond and I have something to respond with if they respond. Otherwise, they could just like it and go, yeah, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah.
And that's where mental health and social media, for me, interact. Mental health as a concept in general, I think, is very shallow and very vague, and I don't find it useful for me. I don't find it useful because mental health, what is mental? Because when you look at cognition, is that the body? I was listening to a Healthy Gamer, GG Healthy Gamer, something like that. I can't remember the channel's name, but they were talking about the brain and the health of the brain and brain fog, and I'm like, yeah, but psychologists look at more than just the brain. They look at the interactions between other people, their groups, their social groups, their body, how their body's feeling. Because psychologists, sports psychologists specifically, look at, okay, how much training are you doing at the moment? How physically drained are you? That's impacting your ability to cognitively function. And mental health, well, I don't see mental health and physical health as different things, because as soon as you say, okay, my physical health is waning, my mental health is good, that doesn't really happen. And, oh, my mental health is waning, but my physical health is good, that doesn't really happen. Your health wanes because of potentially mental categorized factors, but those mental factors are also physical. So separating that, to me, is redundant. I don't find them useful for me. Again, I'm emphasizing the for me bit because I recognize a lot of people like to look at mental health. And when I associate mental health, what I would class as cognition with social media, that to me is where the environment of social media isn't effective for conversation because of the things I've just spoken about. People not continuing the conversation, not contributing to the conversation, or contributing something to the conversation that isn't beneficial. And that comes down to behavioral integrity of the individuals with their philosophy of practice. If you say you need to challenge your assumptions and thoughts, but then you don't challenge your assumptions and thoughts, that's a problem with the behaviors of the people in the conversation, not the place where the conversations are held. And this extends into Twitter versus Threads. Threads at the moment don't have as much of anyway, the retweet conflict, contrarianism. But that's because people aren't over there yet that are doing that. But as soon as you have a conversation, instead of going, oh, you're over here, that's great. Where did you come from? Who are your friends? Did you use it? Once you've got past those introduction conversations, then what happens?
Yeah.
Conversations. Social media isn't the problem. People are the problem. The behaviors people have are the problem.
And that's the thumbnail.
Mark Manson said this like 2 years ago in a blog post. I said it like 3 years before that outside of uni, because I said to my head, of course, it's like social media isn't we were having this conversation because someone had brought it up in a lecture. Oh, social media is going to change the way coaching works. And he said, no, it's not. All it's doing is giving people with a more of a voice. They were shouting about it at their sports clubs, in their sports teams, shouting on the field at their players. Now they just have a social media platform to shout at more people about it. So the internet isn't the problem. It's the people using the internet that's the problem. And that's the way I see the issues that are on social media. It's not Twitter. Twitter is not the problem. It's how people use Twitter that's the problem. But if you moderate how people use, i.e. constrain it, well, now you're reducing the ability to have open, free conversations. Do I think every conversation should happen? No, I think there should be constraints. Where you put those constraints in is where I think the platforms would differ.
Yeah.
It's like going to a different sports club. I'm going to go to that football club because they teach like this. I want to go to that football club because they teach like that. I want to win all the time, so I'm going to go to that one. I want to actually play and engage in the sport. I'm going to go to that one. And that's how I see Twitter versus Threads versus Instagram versus platforms. You accept the constraints and affordances of the environment, the platform, when you go into it. If you don't like it, leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting. So we're a little bit of a side tangent, which, what would an episode of this podcast be without side tangents? So my kids have just finished school, primary school, done. So I don't know what that is in America. You can translate.
Yeah, so do it age. Age is easier rather than saying primary school. So that will say
that
11.
don't work because, so they're 11. So basically, they're transitioning to the next.
The reason I say age is because even in the UK, 11, you could still be in primary school because you could be in a private school or an independent school, and then you're still in a primary school. You're just in middle or you're in infant. So yeah, just say age because it's easier with all the school systems.
They're moving into the next school. So that's in this
they're
area
11.
of UK secondary school. So are 11. And so it was their final day today, yesterday. My little boy was in tears, bless him, because he was very he loves his teacher. We were all in tears because it was hard. And thinking about from an ecological perspective, they are going to two very different schools. As I think I've alluded to before, one is going into mainstream education, one is going into a specialist setting. And as I'm just watching this, if I take every bit of rage and frustration and fear and worry out of my son going into a traditional flawed educational system that is not built for
every system.
It's not built for learning.
Every system is flaws. There's always flaws.
Yes, but it's not conducive to the learning environment that would suit.
You don't think it's going to be effective for him?
Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. It's not going to be effective for him at all.
You don't think it is. It might be. You don't know.
It might be. I could be completely wrong. The constraints may help him a lot. So I am trusting that I'll find out very soon. And if not, then
I'm curious to see where
mm,
that goes, because what we're talking about here is the same thing in my view. We have an environment that is going to add constraints, which
mm,
is going to challenge the individual's philosophy, how they act, how they behave. And if they don't like it on social media, you can just leave if you want to, and you have full autonomy because it's
yeah.
the internet. Inside of this school environment, the autonomy is given to you as the parent. So
Mm.
at what point do you decide, okay, this is no longer effective or conducive to this person's learning? Where do you decide? Because if there's conflict, well, that's part of learning. If there's failure, that's
Yeah.
part of learning. Where do you draw the line and say, okay, no, that enough is enough?
When That's a good question. And it's been something that as I've been in the ecological field, I'm like, oh, this is different now. This feels different now. I don't know. I think it's going to be a gut feeling. And that I'm also very suspicious of as well. I am like, okay, a gut feeling this is going to be bad. And I think for me, there were two options. One, he was going to be homeschooled and I wasn't even going to attempt to put him in there, which is my emotional response. However,
Understandable emotional response.
understand, yeah, exactly. However, at the same time, I don't know whether that would actually be any benefit to him because, as we've discussed, like
Yes,
that's
yes,
social.
benefit. What benefit? Again,
Yeah, exactly.
it's funny every time I see people that get emotional about the decisions, and again, emotional isn't a bad thing. It's
No,
something that we all do. When you lead with when you let your emotions lead your thinking, lead your cognition, typically your words will shift. So you said any benefit because you already have your mind somewhat made up.
yeah,
So you're not sitting on the fence anymore as a scientist. Now you've
yeah,
made a choice, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with making a
yeah,
choice.
exactly. And if there is benefit to, as you were saying, like there is benefit to homeschooling, but there's also a heck of a lot of not benefits and issues and constraints that would have to be dealt with, which in my environment, that's a big constraint that cannot be, I suppose, resolved, whatever. Or
Such as tangible
so
example.
so for example, the social aspect, the social interaction aspect for my son in a homeschooled environment that is not that just he is interacting with far less people.
Hmm.
No matter what I do, it will still be less.
Oh, definitely.
And that was one thing that my brother actually said. If you do it, go this route, you make sure because he was homeschooled, and he actually said, I wish I had more social interaction because now I don't know what the heck I'm doing.
Yep.
And so that's what kind of made me go, okay, cool. That is already a struggle for my little boy. So putting him in her, that is a that is detrimental to a point where I'm not happy.
Hmm.
And so it's like, okay, cool. So the school right now is the option I am going with, but I will be watching it because I want to make sure that he still remains passionate about learning because that's what.
What comes
Oh,
to
I got.
mind? What comes to mind is the dynamic between the parent child, athlete, student, teacher,
Yeah,
student, all those sorts of relationships, because those relationships are essentially educator and learner,
yeah,
right? And when you look at the parent as an educator, most parents don't see themselves as the educator, as the teacher. They see themselves as a parent being different from educator. Like the teacher
yeah,
teaches them, I just parent them. But
yeah,
parenting is teaching.
yeah,
um, so when I look at your situation, I'm thinking in my mind, well, I'm thinking just in general, that you as the parent can help the individual,
yeah.
the learner, navigate the environments. So if they
That's
have a
exactly where I was. That's exactly where that's how I got to this kind of place that I'm at now. It's like, okay, fine. If the school environment is not the affordances there do not match the environment of my son, then this is where I step in. And not necessary to have a go and not necessary to shout and blame and do all of that. It's like, okay, cool. Where do I come in to facilitate those affordances, to facilitate those, to provide that opportunity?
And that is where, for me, behavioral integrity comes into every person, not just parent, but every person with their interactions with other people. If you're going to interact as a coach with your players in one way, but then you're going to interact with other people in a different way, why? Yes, society. Yes, the societal environment has changed. Yes, the system has changed. But why does your philosophy suddenly change drastically with your behaviors in a different environment?
And
There's got to be a rationale for that.
This is something that I've really been. So during this time, I've taken a step back from my business, well, my business in general, just that part of it. But I'm still working for someone else and been doing some work with them, and it was really interesting because my assumption was I had to change and behave in a different way, but that was not working. Obviously, behavioral integrity. I was just like, no, I can't keep doing this. So I stopped and I started working from integrity, I suppose. Yeah.
You're following your philosophy.
I was following my philosophy, and by following the philosophy, people flipping loved it. Like the reception was so great, which was wonderful for me as positive reinforcements. Lovely. Like, okay, cool. That's awesome.
I feel like there's a but coming.
No. There isn't a but, which is quite nice for a change. But no, it was really interesting because it made me go, okay, cool. I can actually stay in integrity throughout what I do. There doesn't have to be caveats or like etc. etc. Like, oh, I've got to do this in this environment and that in that environment and this in this environment and that in that environment, because the integrity is, I suppose, I am in the environment, and yes, it will change that environment or influence the environment, not change it necessarily.
I remember listening to a video on YouTube from Mark Manson, and he was talking about the problem with self-help books. You buy one self-help book, then you buy another one, and they all say the same things, just with different packaging. It's like a 10-minute video, but a point that I found very apt to this conversation is he said, there are things that we do in the world that are difficult but simple. Like when you try and make a gourmet meal, this is the example he gave, try and make a gourmet meal, it's complicated. There are lots of things that go on in it, but it's pretty easy to do. You just follow the steps. And he gave a few examples like that. And then he goes on to say, but in the self-help world, it's the opposite. It's very easy to do. Like when I think the example he gave was when you break up with someone, you say, I'm leaving you, or this isn't working. It's simple, but in action, it doesn't actually work like that. You can't just say, yeah, bye, because there's loads of other context that happens. It's simple when you look at it, but application is far more complicated. And that application, the complicated application of this simple thing, is what most people struggle with. And that is the practice. That is the practice design. That is the behavioral integrity each individual has. And that's where people online, they go, oh, yeah, you just need to eat this and exercise that. Yeah, but saying you need to exercise and actually exercising are two drastically different things. And as much as I dislike a lot of the points and emphasis Atomic Habits has on elements of the book, what it says is very true. You need to have an environment that you can follow and a practice that you can follow. If you don't have a practice you can follow, then all you're doing is saying these wishy-washy buzzwords to try and grab attention to something that you're not really doing, which is not being integral to your philosophy of practice, which to me is a big red flag. It's one of the reasons I struggled at uni. Not necessarily struggled making friends, but struggled respecting people in the same way I respect the athletes that I worked with and the people that I played sport with. the people that I played sport with, they decided, okay, similar to Seth Godin, I am going to turn up at this point in time every day and I'm going to train. And that's what they did. But the people at uni that I was doing my coaching degree with, they were talking about, oh yeah, a player should do this, a player should do that, they should practice here, they should learn. But when you look at what they're doing for their own learning in uni, they didn't do the pre-reading, they hardly ever did any actual work in the lessons. They were on their phone, they were on their laptops, they were playing. I'm like, you're telling these students to do this stuff, you're telling your players to do this stuff, but you're not doing it yourself in your degree that you freaking paid for. No, I don't have respect for you there.
This is something that came up recently for me. So in case it's not obvious, I swear like a trooper. I reduce it here in this environment, but when I get passionate, I swear. And so does my partner. And of course, there is this big thing about kids swearing. And yet I cannot say you shouldn't use that language when I use that language all
My
the
mum
time.
had the same problem.
It's like, how can I say, don't use that word, that's rude? So instead, it's context specific. I literally say to my kids, and Aiden's absolutely loving it right now because he's effing and blinding all over the place. And I'm like, there is value to those words, Aiden, but there's also you can use other words too. But he's enjoying it. And I said, look, use them in the house. I don't care. Do not use them in these environments. That's not okay, because I wouldn't use them in those environments. And so it's like I don't even say it that forcefully. It's like, you can say it here, I don't care, but be cautious when you say it here, here, and here. Don't use it in school. This might happen. Like, you got to be aware of those consequences of what will happen if you use it outside of these. But here, I don't care. The actual response was, I don't give a shit.
I have a funny relationship with profanity because when I was younger, I was not allowed to swear at all. I think
Yeah.
I remember the first time my dad caught me holding my middle finger up, not saying anything. I was just holding my middle finger up. I was in year 6, so I was like 10 or 11. I got grounded, no technology for a whole month, nothing. The next time my dad heard me swear, I was in university. I was in university. I think I was 19. I was 18 or 19. I was moving out to this uni house. It's like down the road because I went to uni close.
Yeah.
But I was 19 before my dad heard me say a swear word. Now it's much more open, but profanity to me was something that you just don't do. And I was always asking myself, but why? I don't understand what's so wrong about these words.
Yeah.
It's a description of something. Yes, it's used quite forcefully in some ways, but it's perceived as forceful because people don't use it. But those people that do use those words, fuck, shit, blah, 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 they use them a lot. And the emphasis of using those words decreases.
Yeah.
And that's how I view profanity. Profanity are words that society has decided to add meaning to.
Yeah.
Which inflate its impact.
Yeah.
I can't inflate impact of words by myself. All I can do is add tonality, which means I can choose to swear all the time. But then the social impact decreases if people know me. So I don't use them. Then when I do use them, suddenly it's oh my God, did you just say what I think you said? And it actually makes a social impact. Because of my vocabulary, I have a larger vocabulary. It gives me the flexibility to play with words, which a lot of people don't have because of the size of their vocabulary, which is something I learned from my uncle. His use of words was profound. Every time I spoke with him, I was like, what does that word mean? I've never heard that word before. Is anyone going to use that? And Seth Godin and people like that are wordsmithing all of the time have that. They use that. And the ability to use language to convey their points of view in various ways, using not necessarily tonality of words, but just the preciseness, the accuracy, the effectiveness of those words gives them a freedom that some people don't have with language. And at the end of the day, cognition is language. What is cognition without another person to engage with? Perception.
Yeah. Yeah. And and that was my point. It's like, and I said this too. I said, yes, use those words, but they lose their meaning fast if you use them all the time. You have other words you can use that would pertain to the same feeling.
This is something that could potentially bring up some emotional reactions. I love it when I have arguments, because to me, arguments move conversations forwards, right?
Yes.
I love arguments. I don't
Yes.
see them as bad. My
Yep.
sister and I, we argue all of the time. Yes, some of them are
Yeah.
sibling arguments and they're petty, but they're siblings. Um, so we'll just poke at each other just to wind each other up. But we both recognize that. My dad was a lone child, so he doesn't understand the whole sibling rivalry thing. But he doesn't like us arguing at all.
Yeah.
He gets frustrated because he was brought up in a household that didn't argue.
Yeah.
But my sister and I argue all the time about everything and anything that we can think about because it's interesting. Both of us are interested in the other person's point of view. Like just a 21-year-old female's point of view on anything is different from mine. And we argue backwards and forwards. A lot of the time we disagree, but because we both recognize we're both scientists, we're both researchers, we both are curious enough to want to understand the other person's perspective, we deliberately go into arguments. Like I say, loads. And the thing that helps me in those conversations, and her to an extent, her vocabulary is less than mine because she was brought up in different ways, different constraints from parents and environments, obviously different year groups, etc. Plus, she's a girl playing a boy sport, I'm a boy playing a girl sport, drastically different dynamics there. But the language is something that I have to curb when I'm speaking with her because she doesn't understand a lot of the words and terms I use. But as we're moving forwards in conversations, as we're growing up, I'm using more words, she's using more words, and the conversations are far more rich. They're way more exciting. I remember hating my sister's arguments because all she used was the same words. I'm like, no, no, no. And it was just so frustrating because she would just end up swearing and then storming off to her room. And my sister at 12, 13 years old, storming off into her room is how I see so many people on social media now. I see 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds doing the same sorts of things. Like, no, you're wrong. Swear, swear, swear. You're wrong. Emotional attack. Go off. And I'm like, you're a 12-year-old girl having a tantrum because you don't have an argument to make.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, swearing is what people resort to. I don't have any words to explain this. I'm going to swear at you and emotionally attack you.
Yeah, this is the fun bit. It's what I often. It's a difference between me and my partner as well. It's like, I am happy to debate the kids, which Hayden loves. so, and then of course he can't get ahead. She doesn't like that. And I'm like,
yeah, she doesn't have as much expertise as you, and that's the whole point of a conversation.
And that's why it's so interesting. Whereas with
the day partner, where he does start challenging you is the day. Wait. Yeah, that's. Sorry to cut you off, but my dad. Obviously, he was the man of the house, very old-fashioned parenting style, and he did not like me challenging him. From the moment I could articulate my point of view, 7, 8 years old, it was a challenge. There was headbutts in the house. As I've moved forwards in education, I overtook him rather quickly. He never really turned up to school. He was much more of a sporty person. Obviously, school was drastically different when he was younger. There was the cane. He went to an all-boys school in London. So, yeah. And as my education moved forwards, my challenging of the conversation became a friction point. So I don't talk with my dad in the same way I talk with my sister because I know he'll just get frustrated. Yeah. And it'd be interesting to see your dynamic between Aiden and you, because I feel like you'll have a different approach and be like, okay, Aiden, tell me. Explain your point of view now.
Oh yeah, I'm like, go, let's go. He has already started doing that, and he asks me really good questions, and some of them are just like, okay, I want to spend every waking second to talk about this. He's asked multiple questions. Sorry for everybody who just had headphones in. That probably would have hurt. But I cannot wait. And I'm seeing glimpses of those conversations now. Like, yes, go on. Have you considered this? And often what happens is
don't say that. Now you're challenging assumptions.
And then I'm just like, okay, cool. So if that's the case, what about this? And I can see he is thinking.
I like your correction there.
Thank you.
I noticed.
Like, here's something that happened because I was talking and communicating about like this experience, and I used the word brain. I'm like, no, it's a load of shit. Stop saying that. Me. And it was interesting because someone came back with someone actually said associated with this. It's commonly thought of as my brain. what people would say would be my brain. I'm like, yeah, but why don't I just say me, I, instead of associated with my brain? It's like analogy of my brain. It's like no.
There's certainly, as I discussed in the Discord, there is certainly an air of vulnerability when you say
Yes.
me,
Yeah.
me.
It's so interesting now that I'm using it. I'm just like, oh, that's uncomfortable to say. I like it. It's like,
This is one of those reflective moments
yeah.
where I now understand why what I did, the behaviors that I changed, made an impact. I'm
Mm.
getting to a point now because I think I'm going to share my story at some point about depression, social anxiety, my struggles with suicide, etc. Because I think it's important. I got through that not through therapy, but through coaching myself.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I recognized things that I needed to change, so I tried to change them. Now I can express why I think it worked. And to me, saying me, my, owning my thoughts, having ownership over my behavior was one of those reasons, which is, again, looking at the ecological approach, taking it away from my brain. It's me. Embodied cognition. I was embracing a philosophy that I hadn't been aware of by changing the actions that I held in day-to-day work or life.
Yeah. I think that's how, because one of the questions that I'm constantly asked by a friend of mine is, how do you keep going even when it's hard? And my blunt reaction is because there's no choice. That's what I want to do. So tough. And it sounds a bit like, I mean, I could choose not to, obviously. And it's a
Yeah.
little bit flippant, my response. But the reality is, this is what I want. This is why I want it. So I'm going to go in that direction. If it changes, then I'll change. But this is what I want. This event in time means I wish to continue doing this. If in the future I change my mind, I won't.
But simply put, goal-directed behavior requires specific practice design. It's in sports coaching. It's been in sports coaching for like a century plus now.
Yeah.
Goal-directed behavior.
Yeah.
It's not complicated. And when you use those terms to explain experiences, it's so much easier. And people know they can grasp what it is that you're trying to say as well. And the questions are then, so what do you do? How do you do that? Not, I don't get why, or trying to explain this big philosophical abstract reasoning to how you manage to get things done. Well, I'm motivated and I felt inspired to do, and I feel good by no. It's a practice. I don't feel good when I'm doing my practice sometimes. You know what? Sometimes I actually don't like what it is that I'm doing, but I'm doing it because I know it's part of the practice.
Yeah.
If you like every part of the day, then it's going to become numb. That's
And
why
so
you
you
have
won't
peaks
like
and
any of it.
troughs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why you need peaks and troughs, which,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm curious to get your thoughts before we go into the comment section about Ali Abdal's book release.
What is it?
Oh, you didn't see it. Yesterday, he did a premiere book release video, basically saying that you can now pre-order his book about feel-good productivity.
Oh, shut up. I'm having
Okay.
an emotional reaction. It's the same. I think one of the coaches that I've worked with in the past kind of named this. It's just another name. It's like the quiet quitting movement and stuff like that. It's marketing,
Yeah,
and that's it.
I
Like,
agree. So I'm curious. This is where I thought that, or this is where my train of thought went. Yeah, choo choo. So most self-help books claim it's a new, alternative, different view, perspective, lens on the self-help, productivity, space, movement, whatever. But I don't think they are. Tiago's book is a little bit different because it's a specific framework of action.
yeah,
And it doesn't really challenge philosophy that much. I would argue the book isn't like it's far longer than it needs to be, but but it's still a book that takes an alternative approach to action. A
yeah.
lot of the other self-help books, they're not different.
Philosophy. They're philosophy based.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, but they're a different packaging of the same thing. Mark Manson has said this as well about his book. His book is great, and it takes a different approach. It's a different approach at the same problems. So Mark Manson's book was different because it took a negative view rather than a positive view of all this self-help productivity stuff. Still the same points of view. Still the same like actionable points anyway. When you look at the ecological approach, how would you describe that? Is it a different view? Or is it
they're just different affordances.
Yeah, but
or maybe even just different environments.
So step back. Self-help, self-improvement are built on traditional assumptions of cognitive science.
Oh, yes, obviously.
So a lot of them, even though they're different lenses, different perspectives, they still attach themselves to this philosophy that a lot of people follow. So is the ecological approach an alternative to self-help?
Yes. 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 That was something. I received a message and someone was really intrigued. Like, I really loved your presentation on Monday. What's your background? They went, what's your
Presentation on
background?
Monday? Pause. Presentation on
Yeah,
Monday.
I did a workshop for someone on Monday, which I'm now releasing as my own program course and thing.
Right. Okay.
And I ran a workshop for my client about tech, and of course, I took the ecological approach. I didn't actually say it was the ecological approach because no one cared. Which is the reality of the situation. They just wanted to get something done, so I used an ecological approach to tech. That's what I was using. For everyone here, they'll enjoy that, but they don't care. But someone did, and someone went, "What's your background?" And I'm like, and I just said some spiel. Everything I was based on, and I used what I think it was Julia that suggested Gibsonian psychology versus an ecological approach, and they went, "Oh yeah, I did a degree in psychology," and I'm just sat there going, "I didn't." And then I'm like, "Okay, fine. If you really want to go, here's actually what I'm talking about." Because I think that's what I'm going to start with is like Gibsonian. And then if someone actually, I think they would find this interesting. But it was interesting to have people notice that the approach was different and actually different to the point. It's like, what is your background? Where do you come from? It's like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, I did stuff. Nah.
I reckon because you said psychology,
Yeah.
it's more people can associate with it more because they know what psychology is. Because I can imagine people will say, I took psychology as a course, as a class, or I did that at A level, or like you say, I did that as a degree. But psychology as a field is huge. It's huge, which is why I think ecological psychology was used for the book.
Yeah, because it's
I have some videos that I'm scripting out for the What I'm Learning channel, which are, I know one of them, which I haven't scripted that I have planned, is going to be, it has the potential to turn some heads, to use that phrase. But I'm explaining the ecological approach through stories. The one that's coming out tomorrow is about the phone, the extended cognition phone thing, which will be interesting to see. How I'm marketing them is something I'm trying to navigate and challenge. But the one after that, the one I scripted this week, was about direct perception. Somehow, I managed to express the intricacies of direct perception and information processing in 7 minutes.
I am impressed.
But it took me like 4 days to figure it out.
That's quite impressive.
I've left out a lot, but I think I've left out the bits that you, if you're interested, you'd be curious enough to go forwards and ask those questions.
Yeah.
So it's not, it hasn't left it so it's oversimplified.
Yeah.
But it's left it people asking questions.
Yeah.
And that's the way I prefer it. A 7-minute video to go, here's an overview of stuff. Yes, there's some questions here that you'll want to go and explore. Then go and explore.
Yeah. I think that's quite exciting. So I recently took down my work with me page, and I'm thinking of redesigning quite a lot of the businessy stuff and from the ecological lens, because a lot of what I've got currently is very much traditional. And I'm like, no. I'm like,
You
yeah.
have truly swallowed the red pill.
Yeah, that red pill is digested. It's been completely and utterly, it's entered my bloodstream.
Yep. I'm the same, but I came from a constraints view. I one so the a little bit of an insider information into the channel for those listening. I'm trying to make the titles as simple as possible, but also as provocative as possible, because you can't grab attention without being a little bit provocative. So I'm going to title the direct perception video Challenging Coaches, because I feel like it could be perceived in lots of different ways.
Ooh, I like that. That's clever.
Yeah, because I can imagine some coaches in sport will be like, okay, I'm intrigued. But then there'll be business coaches as well. So I don't know how it's going to go, how it's going to work. But yeah, I'm working out how to market this sort of stuff is difficult because the ecological approach, it doesn't work. So moving into the comments, I only have a couple. I think you've only got a
Yeah,
couple as well.
same.
The one that I want to pick up first was about Obsidian specifically and about
Yep.
time blocking and task management in Obsidian. Oh, I skipped over the live sync. Live sync in Obsidian. I don't think live sync is really needed in Obsidian for the way that I use it or the way that most people that I've seen use it. If you want a collaborative note-taking tool, use a collaborative note-taking tool like Google Docs or Notion or literally any other collaborative tool. So live sync, I don't think is really needed for Obsidian for what Obsidian is focused on being used for.
Yeah.
Time blocking and to-do integration, I don't see the point of doing it in Obsidian because Obsidian isn't my calendar app. So I use Morgan for that. That's all I really got to say on that. And when it comes to the Morgan app, I showed John beforehand that the new redesign is really nice. And I'm using Morgan for project management, task management, quick note taking. I'm using Morgan for a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I think I'm opening Morgan than I'm opening more than I'm opening Obsidian.
I think because I work in Obsidian all the time.
Yeah.
It's just on my screens.
Yeah.
So I'm opening Morgan and I'm sort of engaging in Morgan, but I'm in Obsidian
In
more.
Obsidian. Yeah. And I think I'm the exact opposite because a lot of my stuff is so task driven at the moment versus nice big projects to sink my teeth into.
Yeah, you don't have the affordance or the opportunity. Well, you probably do have the opportunities to sit down for hour plus write. It's just the constraints of the environment don't really lend itself to something you would want to do.
Someone was talking about Tiago Forte and their stuff. And I don't really have very much to add on this one apart from like how they mentioned that they disagree with the Tiago Forte categorization of like this was related back to the
Archetypes.
the archetypes. And I think that explains my relationship with a lot of what Tiago does. I don't agree with the categorization because it's marketing versus philosophy, I feel. Well,
I have a similar feeling about Nick.
I think most of the productivity people on the internet, it is marketing, not philosophy. Most PKM
yeah,
is
I feel like those that have got a large audience have leveraged their ability to sell and market ideas. But the process of selling and marketing ideas is different from the practice of doing them day to day. That's where I get frustrated. And that's where I think for me in this comment, I agree to disagree. Like, I agree with Tiago with the overall view of some of his points, but I disagree.
I mean, that for me is like I like the idea of para, but it's missing my context. But often people just use his stuff verbatim and don't think about the context. They're like, oh, he's this expert, he's this, productivity organizational guru. So I'll just follow what he says. And then when it doesn't work, he's wrong. Except he's not wrong, but he's also not right. And that I don't even know whether that's actually what Tiago is saying.
This is where I feel the so I I tweeted, I know, John, you had this on earlier. I tweeted about talent. And inside the conversation with Kalang, they said something, don't Nick Milo another guy, please. And I responded with a quote from a book from my head of course. And the quote reads as such: practitioners do not find simplistic, in brackets, rational interpretations of the coaching process of much value in supporting or informing their work. Now, that was in relation to coach education and teacher
Yeah,
education and coach development, because if you give someone a formula, a framework, a step-by-step guide of how to do something, it is not helpful because you can't just slap it into your practice. It doesn't work like that.
yeah,
The individual needs practice, they need explanations in the practice, and they need to engage in reflective practice throughout the learning experiences. And when we look at the prescribed knowledge that the people online, myself included, give, because it's prescribed, it's assumed that you just dump it into your practice, which doesn't work. And because of the way that the information is conveyed, because of the language used, because of the, I would class, because of the marketing that the ideas are put across as, the interpretation is that this is the approach. This is what
yeah,
you do. This works like this. But that's simplistic and overly simplistic, which leads to the oversimplification and application of those things used, which is where I like the ideas being talked about, but I don't like the way they're spoken about because it's not from a cognitive perspective. It's not from a perspective where you can actually contribute to a conversation here. The only way you have a conversation with someone's marketing is by questioning their marketing because they haven't afforded the ability to talk.
yeah. There's a comment. I had a client in the past who said that marketing is a conversation,
No, it's
and
not.
I would love it to be true, but it's not. In the common view of marketing, it's not a conversation. It's, will you buy my thing? Please buy my thing. I want your thing. Like, not you want my thing.
I think it goes beyond that as well, though, because when it comes to the marketing of a product, a lot of the time you're also marketing yourself as an authority. You are
Mm.
marketing yourself as someone with credibility in a field. And if you have credibility in a field, there's got to be a reason why you have it. I'm going to use Ali as an example here, and by extension, medical students. Just because you're a medical student doesn't mean that you put more time into your degree than someone else doing another degree. And I would argue I put way more time into my undergraduate degree than Ali did in his, because the fact that he had, one, time to build businesses, two, build a YouTube channel, and three, have a social life outside of his degree to listen and read all of the books that he did shows that he had time in his day to do those things. He didn't make the time to do it. Like, he had the same time as me, but my time was spent, as an exposure to what my time was like at university, from the time I woke up, which, because I was at uni, it was like 9 or 10, depending on when the lectures were. I started reading articles. Then I did lectures. Then I read more articles. Then I practiced the thing. I did the coaching. Then I did the sport. I learned the thing. So I'm in the practice again. I didn't do anything else. I didn't read books. I didn't watch YouTube. The only time I watched YouTube was to watch a lecture about the thing I was learning. So my entire day was directed at understanding and learning the content of my degree. So the credibility of being productive, well, are you being productive if, say, 40, 50% of your time is being a doctor and the other 50% is doing this other thing? Or add another percentage when he did become a doctor, you've got 50% doing a degree, 20, 30% being a doctor, and then 20, 30% doing this YouTube thing. I didn't have that 20, 30% to do the YouTube thing because I was still doing this other stuff. It was still what I would class as being in the practice. So are they being productive? In comparison to someone else, I would argue no. Academics are far more productive than those on YouTube, but they don't have a productivity channel, so they can't say how productive they are. When you look at the productive people, the people that are really productive. Carl Friston, for example. Have you not seen how many academic papers he's published and how much work he's done, how many lectures he's given? But no one knows how productive he is because he just practices. He does the work. He thinks. He's cognitively active. If you are productive in a field that requires cognition and thinking, that's what you're doing most of the time, which is what I do most of my time.
Yeah.
Not as much of the time as other people, which is why I recognize I need to challenge other people in the field that know more than me, because they've been in the practice longer than me, which is why I'm quite happy to sit here and go, I disagree with you, or I don't know, explain this to me. I guess I went on a little bit of a rant there, but when people market and they sell themselves as credible people, actually looking at what makes them credible is difficult, because I would argue there is a flaw in the sources that they're using, especially when they start using other people that have perceived their own ability to be productive. If I tell you, if I was to say to someone, hey, talk to John, he can tell you that I'm smart. Like, that's not fair at all.
Yeah.
It's just not valid in my view. And again, this is one of the assumptions that comes into the ecological approach. Knowledge. Where do you get knowledge from? Oh, it's the senses. Well, if the senses aren't really true, what's your assumption? Where is true knowledge coming from? I mean, that's a whole other conversation with marketing and social credibility. But
we need to put that down because that would be a good one.
Social credibility. Yeah, I'm going to very quickly add that in. So social credibility, done. Added podcast. I love Obsidian. So my final comment from Davos was different parts of the vault need different setups. And this is exactly why I like Obsidian, because it's flexible enough to have different contexts in the same place. Notion, yes, you can do it. Not as flexibly from my experience, though.
No, I love it. That's why Obsidian is what, and I think often people who don't like Obsidian don't understand what it can do, or are not exposed to the affordances of Obsidian. There we go. That's better. I like that better. That's more. That feels more accurate.
Yeah, I agree. I think when a perfect example is the canvas with metadata menu, my book library seems to have grabbed some attention because of the ability of moving a file from one group to another group, and it automatically changes information. Or I didn't say anything new. The information was out there. All you had to do was look. When you see the affordances given because someone has, with expertise, has exposed that opportunity for behavior, you can then attune your focus to it and then recreate that behavior.
Yeah.
But that's one of the pros and cons of Obsidian. There are lots of things you can do, but the only way you know that you can do them is by practicing. But that is the whole point of practice, to expose yourself to the different affordances that the tool has available to you.
Productivity and PKM labels.
Fuck that.
Yeah. What's it all mean? Because it's the same comment from our dear constant commenter,
Davos.
Was talking about a system loosely follows. Oh yeah, the thing with PKM words discussions is these labels often just tell with what systems the person started with and what basic framework the notes might have. But because of the won't work for you problem, everyone has a similar but quite different vault setup. So you basically name our vault system after the biggest group of stones in the vault. But basically, we all name things but have completely different meanings for them. For example, what is a project? Whenever someone asks, oh, I'm going to set up this project, what are you talking about? Because I very much doubt your project will be the same as what I deem as a project. So let's explore that first, because until we get the language, you're not going to get the results you want.
It comes back to language again. There's an ongoing conversation inside of the Discord, inside the What's Learning Discord, or the Educational Science Discord, about the semantics, the language used in PKM, because adding more words and more jargon is overcomplicating an already complicated space. And I think that partly is down to marketing. Actually, I think a lot of it is down to marketing, because when you look at the Cornell note-taking method, what's the Cornell method? Because there's like 7 different versions of it. I don't really, okay, I understand why there are different methods. I understand why there are different frameworks. I understand the purpose for the different methods and frameworks. What I don't understand is why we separate them in conversation when we're discussing how to write something down.
Mm.
That I don't grasp.
Mm.
And when we talk about what note taking is, what thinking is, what cognizing is, why do we need so many different words for it? Why do we need so many different terms for it? If you're describing a thing, it's a noun. If the noun is not different from another noun, why have we got two words for the same thing? When you look at math, for some stupid reason, in complicated math, you can use n in so many different ways. But it's far more effective that way. Then again, in math, you do have multiple things meaning the same. But the point here is, if you have one word that can encapsulate a concept, a process, ideally, a verb, a process, then you can use that word in varied environments to convey the same experience, which means you can talk in the same phase of thought. Trying to work out what words to use there. You're speaking, because you're always speaking the same language. You're speaking with the same ideas. You're cognitively connected, as it were, rather than speaking past one another. And that is why I question so many people on platforms when they use words that I don't think conveys information. I guess, and as an extension from this, if you use something, you say something that is a technique, a framework, a method, but there is minimal or limited difference from how we naturally do said thing, is it really a technique, a method, or framework? Or is it just something you've marketed and added steps to, which adds constraints that is just a practice design? If it's natural learning, but you've added a constraint to it, why do you need to say this framework, this model? It's natural learning, but it's using this constraint, this one practice design. And if that one constraint is misunderstood by the term used, Feynman technique, then you need to be more explicit about the information you're saying. I'm not referring to Nick here. I'm just saying the Feynman technique in general. When you look at step 1, 3, and 4 of the Feynman technique, it's how everyone naturally learns.
Yeah.
But the only thing the Feynman technique adds is explain simply. But explain simply can be interpreted in various forms. And the most popular form of that is explain it to a 5-year-old, which is, excuse my language, fucking bollocks. Like, it doesn't help you at all. There is no benefit in explaining something to a 5-year-old. If I was to say to a 5-year-old, hey, do you know what the Feynman technique is? They're going to start sucking their thumb and go somewhere else. Or they're going to start playing with a toy. They're going to kick a football at a wall. They don't care.
They don't care.
That doesn't help me learn anything. Okay, I'm taking it too bluntly. Explain it to someone that doesn't understand what you're saying. Well, that still sounds stupid. If I remember teaching in Uganda, when I was teaching in Uganda, I was explaining to them what a cat was. If I'm explaining to them what a cat was, I can't explain the dynamic of a cat and a dog inside of gardens and environments because they just don't grasp what it means. Now, that's not bad on their part. That's just, I can't help myself learn by explaining a cat and dog environment to them because they have no idea what I'm talking about. It'd be the same as talking to a wall. So, okay, we need to be more specific about that. And now we're looking at who we're talking to. And how do we work out who we're talking to? Well, that's practice design because it depends what you want to learn, what you know, what they know, what you think you know, what you think they know, which means it's practice design and not a constraint from a technique, which means the technique is pointless. It's redundant. It doesn't do anything. It's just saying, hey, go learn stuff. No shit, Sherlock. I know some people could argue back, and this is me being critiquing my own thinking here. They could argue back and say, oh, it's a heuristic. It's a way to get people to think about learning. But it's not. It's a way to get people to think about conversations in exploring language. But it's not a heuristic. It's just a term. The only reason people are going to go explore the Feynman technique is if they're interested in the learning technique itself.
Yeah, there's no it goes back to this thing of like um time tracking in business of like I don't want to learn how to press a button to keep track of my time. Like that doesn't seem valuable. I want to stack it up with multiple things. I want to be able if I want to learn to do something or if I want to create a practice, that practice needs for me to have multiple uses. Because if I'm just learning to press a button on time to track my time, how is that useful in my environment, in multiple environments? It's not. So why am I going to do it? The answer is I'm not. And so for me, it's important to have like it needs to matter more than once. And the Feynman technique doesn't matter more than once. It is a thing that doesn't make sense, is not ecologically valid.
Something I want to expand on a little bit is this, again, completely different conversation, different time on Twitter, but it's about the Feynman technique. They said that they use the Feynman technique a lot. And so I asked them, oh, what part about the Feynman technique helped you? And they said, oh, well, it was the explaining things I didn't understand and exploring new concepts. And I said, oh, okay, so how is that different from when you're learning in lecture in schools and stuff? And they said, well, it's not really different. It's just because I'm exploring it, I'm asking these questions and I'm using active recall. And I said, okay, so when you're exploring a topic, when you're looking into something, are you actively recalling or are you retrieving information as you read through the information? They said, yeah, I guess so. And I said, right, so the Feynman technique suggests you explain it simply. Are you explaining something simply to yourself, or are you exploring the ideas that you've written down? Oh, yeah, I'm exploring the ideas. So how is that the Feynman technique? Well, I guess it's not really, but I'm still using active recall. And this conversation went on for a while. And at the end of the conversation, they said, okay, so what am I doing then if it's not the Feynman technique or active recall? And I said, learning. That's all you're doing. You are learning in a way that a human learns. You perceive information and you act accordingly to the information through an experience that is learning. That's it. You're not using a technique. You're just learning.
Ta-da!
But it's not flashy. It's not marketable. It's not nice. So yeah.